these two new entries into this series of games are very different than the original, and they're very different from each other, but they do, of course, share a similar theme. If you're not familiar with the original game, this is a card game that played 1 to 4 players and takes about 20 to 45 minutes to play. And in this game, players would be using cards in order to build up their style and their outfit, pretty much represented by a bunch of different icons that are going to be shown on your different gear and clothing that you're able to equip. And then players would be going into the different dungeons and encountering different monsters that also have their own personalities, which are also represented by those same icons. Players will be able to interact with those monsters depending on how much overlap they have with their icons and the icons on the monster cards. This would then determine whether the player would be able to befriend those monsters, fight them, or even potentially fall madly in love. But whichever option it is, this did come with a set collection element, and players would be trying to set collect certain types of monsters in order to score the most victory points at the end of the game. The two new entries being introduced in this campaign are standalone games, but they can also be mixed in with the original game if you do want to incorporate elements and if you do already own that previous version. But this is going to be introducing both a roll and write as well as a role-playing game. I'll go over the role-playing game first, which is called Dungeon Date Delves, and this one's going to be providing a 1 to 2 hour role-playing experience. But at the start of the game, players are going to be each choosing a combination of creature and calling, which is going to set up some of their starting stats for the beginning of the game. But of course, players will be able to find new gear and style as they play through the game in order to change their personality and change the way that they might interact with some of the characters and creatures that they'll run into in the various dungeons. But of course, there is a goal and there is a narrative because this is a role-playing game. And in order to set all that up, you're going to be rolling a combination of dice at the start of the game. And then depending on the values that you roll for the various colored dice, you're going to be matching those up with a list of different possibilities and then combining those in order to set up the player's goals for the game and as well as kick off that general narrative. There are a bunch of illustrated dungeons that players will be able to explore, and in these dungeons, players are going to be discovering different monsters and characters, each with their own passions, hobbies, weaknesses, each of which may or may not synergize with your character's stats, which of course you can then use in your role-playing to determine if you want to fight that creature, befriend it, or even possibly take your relationship to the next level. As I said, this can be incorporated with the original game, and you'll be able to take the different monster and item cards from that game and then use them to visualize the accomplishments so far and the different gear and monsters that you have run into. And the other game being introduced in this campaign is the roll and write, which is called Dungeon Date Roll with Style. And in this game, players are each going to get their own sheet of paper, and you're going to be filling in different stats at the beginning of the game in order to determine your character's style. And then each round, players are going to be rolling a pool of dice, and then each player is going to be simultaneously choosing one of those dice to activate for their own player sheet, and the number is going to dictate the rooms that you can choose to visit, and then the color is going to determine the type of encounter you're going to have. There's different types of encounters that you could experience, whether that's running into different monsters or characters, or discovering different treasure that you can then use to change your personality and style, which can then be used to change the type of interactions you can have with those various monsters. Just like with the other games, your style is going to be determining what kind of interactions you can have with those monsters and whether you can befriend them or whether you can fight them. But players will be essentially getting different victory points for what they decide to do, but then players will also be able to fill in areas on their sheet for their different accomplishments, and players will be able to gain bonus victory points at the end of the game for filling in certain rows or columns or combinations of these different possibilities. Just like with the role-playing game, this one is also compatible with the original game, where you'll be able to use some of those original components in order to make this one have a bit more table presence. And if any of these sound interesting to you, you can check them out. I do have them linked in the description below.